Welcome to the African Weekly Roundup, a weekly program every Sunday here on HORUFADHI Media, where I discuss the latest news and events across the African continent. I'm Sultan Mohammed, your host and producer here on HORUFADHI Media. We hope you find this program very informative. Please like, share, and for similar content, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media. Also, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media Group's second channel, known as HORUFADHI TV, where you are currently watching this program, and where you can find other exclusive programs just behind the scenes, and Amhara, Salah, among others. And last but not least, do follow myself, Sultan Mohammed, Suleiman Hashi, Yasin Abdi, and the wider HORUFADHI Media team on our social media platforms that should appear on the screen any moment. Let's get straight into the headlines. And we kick off in West Africa, where at least 74 people were killed in Nigeria's Benue state in two separate attacks by gunmen this week, local officials and police said on Saturday, the latest clash in an area where violence between pastoralists and farmers is common. Now, violence has increased in recent years as population growth leads to an expansion of the area dedicated to farming, leaving less land available for open grazing by nomads that have cattle. Now, Benue State Police spokesperson Catherine Anane said 28 bodies were recovered at a camp for internally displaced people in the Mgban local government area between Friday evening and Saturday morning. It was not immediately clear what triggered the attack, but witnesses said gunmen arrived and started shooting and killing several people indiscriminately. Now, this follows a separate incident in the same state on Wednesday, where in a remote village, suspected herdsmen killed villagers at a funeral. Now, Paul Hemba, a security advisor to the Benue state governor, told the media that 46 bodies were recovered after Wednesday's attack. Now, President Muhammadu Buhari, in a statement on Saturday, condemned the recent bout of killings in the Benue state in which tens of thousands of people were killed in the Mugidi community and directed security forces to increase surveillance in affected areas. Many such attacks in remote parts of Nigeria go unreported as thinly stretched security forces often respond late to distress calls by communities. Now, Benue is one of Nigeria's middle belt states where the majority Muslim north meets predominantly Christian south. Competition over land use is particularly high in the middle belt area, where fault lines between farmers and herders often overlap with ethnic and religious divisions. Now, staying in Nigeria, gunmen abducted at least 80 people, mostly women and children, in Nigeria's Amhara state, a hotspot for kidnappings for ransom, by armed gangs targeting remote villages and residents on Saturday. Gangs of armed men have attacked hundreds of local communities across northwest Nigeria in recent years, while Islamist militants continue to stage attacks in the northeast region. The latest kidnapping took place on Friday in the Wanzamia village, which is an area in the Zamfara state, and 3 residents have told the media. Now, Zamfara is one of the states most affected by kidnappings. Now, Musa Usman, whose 14 years old son Ibrahim was among those kidnapped, said children and women from the village were clearing land for farming and collecting firewood when they were taken by gunmen and marched into a nearby forest. The children from different households went to collect firewood, and few of them were going to farms in search of manual jobs when they were abducted, Usman told Reuters news agency by phone. Now, Zamfara police spokesman Muhammad Shahu confirmed the incident in a statement but did not say how many people were abducted. The police were working with the military and the community security guards to rescue the victims, he said. Now, another parent told media outlets that some people were also kidnapped in 2 nearby villages of Kuchuri and Danwuri, who had gone to Wanzimia to clear land to farm. Now, the gunman had not yet made ransom demands, residents have said. Now, Amina Tasfer said her daughter was also abducted and that most of the children taken were between age 12 and 17. Now, kidnappers in Nigeria often keep their victims for months if ransom is not paid, and also demand villagers pay protection fees to be allowed to farm and harvest their crops in their own land. Now, Nigeria's military has been bombing bush camps used by armed gangs, but the attacks still continue, and the armed gangs simply just move from one bush camp to another bush camp. Now, over to Central Africa in Chad, where Chad's government ordered German ambassador to leave the country within 48 hours, it said in a statement. A decision sources said was motivated by his comments about Chad's delayed transition to civilian rule after a 2021 coup. This decision of the government is motivated by the discourteous attitude and the non-respect of diplomatic customs, the country's communication ministry said on Twitter late on Friday. Now, 2 Chaldean government sources said on Saturday that the ambassador, Gordon Craig, had criticized delays in holding elections after the coup, and a ruling last year that will allow interim military leader Mohamed Idris Deby to run in elections in 2024. Now, Germany's own foreign ministry did not comment on the expulsion of its ambassador, but a source familiar with the ministry's thinking said the move was absolutely incomprehensible and that it was in contact with Chadian authorities. Now, military leaders in the Central African country originally promised an 18-month transition to elections when Deby seized power after his father, President Idriss Deby, was killed in a battlefield during conflict with insurgents, ending decades of authoritarian rule. But last year, the military government extended the timeline by 2 years, delaying elections until October 2024, sparking protests in which dozens of civilians are reported to have been injured. Now, warring regional powers and the United States have warned against extending military rule. Now over to East Africa, in Ethiopia, where gunfire was heard in at least 2 towns in Ethiopia's Amhara region on Sunday as thousands protested against a federal government order to integrate regional special forces of the Amhara into the police or national army, residents said. Now, members of Amhara special forces and allied militia vowed to oppose Thursday's order, setting up a standoff with the government of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, who said in a statement that the plan was for the sake of Ethiopia's national unity. The order applies to all of Ethiopia's 11 regions, which have had their own regional armies and the right to use their own language, but has been received particularly badly in Amhara, the second biggest region, which has fallen out with Abiy recently. Now, residents of Gondar, where a large protest was taking place, and members of the Amhara Special Forces had fired their weapons into the sky all night in defiance of the order. Now, 2 residents of the town Kobo said they heard artillery fire outside the town. It was not immediately clear who was responsible. There were protests in at least 6 other towns, residents have said, all speaking on condition of anonymity out of fear of their safety. Now, spokespersons for Ethiopia's federal government and the army for the Amhara regional government could not be immediately reached for a comment. Now, a media outlet run by the regional government quoted Amhara President Yilkal Kefale as saying the federal government's order was being misunderstood as requiring the disarmament of special forces. In fact, it was simply organizing regional forces under a federal structure, it quoted him saying. Our special force and the militia from Amhara fought in support of the federal army during its 2-year war in a neighboring Tigray region, the conflict which killed tens of thousands and ended with a political truce last November. But in recent months, Amhara leaders and activists have accused Abiy Ahmed's government of turning a blind eye to the atrocities committed against ethnic Amharas living in the neighboring Oromia region and of planning to hand back territory captured by Tigray forces during the war. They say the discussions or dissolution of their regional special forces would leave them vulnerable to attacks not just from Tigray, but also Oromia. A government spokesman did not immediately respond to requests for comment on these charges from international media. Now, finally, over to the Democratic Republic of Congo, where Islamic State on Sunday claimed responsibility for an attack on a village in the eastern part of the country that authorities said killed around 20 people. Now, IS claimed responsibility for the attack in a statement on its Telegram channel. The attack, which took place on Friday, a village on the outskirts of Beni, is part of a wave of violence against civilians that the army and local authorities blame on a group called the Allied Democratic Forces, or ADF, a Ugandan group based in eastern Congo that has pledged allegiance to the Islamic State based in North Middle East. Now, local activist Yanvia Kasihiro said 22 bodies had arrived at the nearby hospital, according to international media. And a spokesman for the government, or the army, shall I say, in North Kivu region, where the attack took place, Anthony Mwalashe, said the assailants used machetes to avoid confrontation with the military. Now, the attack took place in one of 2 conflicted provinces where Congo replaced civilian authorities with military administrations more than a year ago in an attempt to halt the violence. Now, this week, the UN peacekeeping mission in Congo condemned another mass attack committed by the ADF in neighboring Ituri province, which also killed around 30 people. And that's around 50 people the terrorists have killed this week in Eastern Congo. Congo, particularly in the east section, has had a large wave of violence, not just from the ADF militant group, that's a Ugandan group, but also from rebel groups such as M23, among other groups, who continue to wage war in the eastern part of the region that's rich in minerals and resources. Now, that is the top stories on the African program this week. Please tune in next week for further updates from across the African continent.